to The London Architect, everyone. This is, we think, our 5th or 6th episode, but I'll have to double check that afterwards. Today we have Phil Pitman with us from Herbert Stumpp. That's your company, Phil. How are you today?
I'm well.
Thank you so much for joining us. So could you tell me a little bit about Herbert Stumpp and how long you've been running it?
Well, it came about probably on one of the first jobs that I went when I went out on my own in about 2001, 2002. And we had this huge job, which was an earth filling exercise, and it was down in Chirk Farm. And there was it was an old quarry, and it was about 1.5 miles long and about half a mile wide. And it was just a hole in the ground that was about 4 meters deep, and we had to fill it with clay.
Okay.
And then we were going to build 1,500 houses on top of it.
Yeah.
On my first day there was somebody had already started doing some work, and there was a JCB stuck in the mud, and all you could see was the top of the cab of this JCB, and on the top of this cab was the name Herman Stumpp. And
Herman?
It was Herman Stumpp. It wasn't Herbert Stumpp.
Okay.
And then the geotechnical guy that I was working with said, that's not a name or a vision you're going to forget in a hurry. So that's when Herbert Stumpp came about. So I thought, right, I'm going to call the company Herbert Stumpp.
Where did you get Herbert from?
I just thought, actually, my granddad had a friend called Herbert.
Oh, okay.
So I thought, okay, Herbert Stumpp it is.
Yeah, that works.
And that's how it came about.
It's a very British name.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah. It's memorable.
Yeah.
So we might as well let people know that you are a structural engineer. I forgot to mention that.
I do civil structures, party walls. I do all sorts of things. I'm a charter building engineer. I'm not a member of the various institutions you can belong to.
Okay.
But I tend to do all sorts.
Okay. Okay. So can we rewind a little bit just to start with what inspired you to go into structural engineering and everything else?
I suppose if we go right back to the beginning, I was sent down this academic path at A levels doing physics and maths and science, and it was something I hated. I always wanted to do building.
Okay.
And in the summer, I got a job working for a firm of surveyors.
Yeah.
And they were land surveys, and this was in my sort of after I'd done my first year of A levels, and I thought, right, I'm going to stick with this job. I'm not going back.
Yeah.
So I stuck with doing surveys, and I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And then I thought, I want to go a little bit further than this. So I went and did ONC, HNC in building and civils. And then went and worked freelance for all sorts of different consultants.
Okay. Nice.
I mean, my background is pretty much civils. So it's roads, drainage, external works, that sort of thing. And then I suppose coming forward, because when I went out on my own, most of the jobs what I was getting required me to do structural engineering as well and party walls. So that was something else that I just sort of went off and studied and added on. Yeah.
So did you study that at university, or
it was I did it at HNC level.
What's
so
that?
That's a higher national certificate.
Oh right.
And that was back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
That was a day release thing. So you have your day job doing your design and everything else and working out on site. And then one day a week you do, it starts off with the ONC, which is the Ordinary National Certificate. And then I did that, and then I did a Higher National Certificate, and then went off and carried on working.
Nice, okay.
So
after that, who did you start working for?
I actually worked freelance. I was working for an agency called Manpower at the time, and they used to send me out on different consultants. And my first sort of proper design role was with Horsham Council, and they had this big civil engineering department. And they were doing roads and drainage schemes and all sorts of things. And I thought, I like this. So I stayed there for about 6 months, and then I went to the Environment Agency, and I was doing rivers and dams and weirs and all sorts of things up there, and banks and sort of river embankments and things like that.
Okay.
And then it was just 6 months. 12-month contracts here and there, and with different consultants, people like Arup and Travers Morgan, which then became Capita, Whitby Bird, which is that's an American company. I can't think what it is.
Okay.
A lot of some of the big ones, and some pretty obscure small ones as well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's nice.
It's been a bit of a variety. Yeah.
Yeah, good balance. Have you always worked in the UK?
I have. Yeah.
Okay. Any dreams to go abroad, or is this where it's at?
I like working here. It's what I know. I mean. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe I'd have jumped at working somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I had a young family then,
Okay.
So I didn't really want to leave, and now I can. I don't want to.
Mhm.
So I quite like the clients that I've got and the workload that I've got, and
you've built a sort of reputation for yourself.
Yeah, and I've got regular clients. So I've got I've got a core of people that give me work, and if I get extra work in, great. But I'm quite happy with how things are.
That's a good setup.
Yeah.
So could you walk us through a day in the life of Mr. Pitman?
I get up, make a cup of tea, go and sit in the office for 10 hours. Yeah.
Oh God.
No, it's a bit more to it than that. I mean, if you take a typical project, one that comes in, I'll go and meet the client, discuss what the brief is, because I do a huge range of things. I mean, I do things from sort of like little extensions all the way through to industrial estates. So you've got the big industrial sheds. So I mean, a typical day would be sitting down, looking at what the program for the week is, working out whether I'm doing a foundation design, working out whether I'm doing superstructure design, drainage. No two jobs are different. You get the same sort of things in every job, but they're not. It's not
never
all the same.
identical.
It's never identical. No.
And what is the lifespan of a project? Say if you're doing like a small extension, what your part of it, your remit.
Yeah.
What's the
Well, if I go and see a potential client and it's just a little, excuse me, say a single story extension.
Yeah.
I'll go and I'll have a measure up. I'll go back if it needs planning. I'll do the planning drawings, and then from the planning drawings, I'll do all the working drawings so that they can go ahead and build it. I mean, it doesn't actually physically take a huge amount to do of time to do. I mean, to do the measured survey and to draw it all up, you're probably looking at about a day. And then if it needs to go in for planning, there's probably another half a day to get all that together, and then you put it in for planning, and then you sit around waiting for about 10 weeks while the planners decide what colour an orange is. Or,
oh God,
it's a bureaucracy thing.
Okay.
So it goes in for planning. You get your planning permission, or fingers crossed, and then I'll do the working drawings, and again that's probably about a day and a half's work. It really depends on how big the job is, but for something that's like a single story extension, then that's how long it'll take.
Okay. And what is your salary? How is it measured? Is it in the amount of time that you've spent on? Yeah,
well, I do all my work, most of my work on a fixed fee, so I know roughly how long something's going to take me, how many hours something's going to take me to do. So let's say I've got 19 houses and a block of flats.
Yeah.
I mean that might take me 3 months. It might take me 2 months. It really depends on how complex it is. So I'll sit down and I'll work out how many hours that I need to do it, and then I've got to put my overheads on. So I've got things like professional indemnity insurance and the usual sort of heating, lighting rates and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And then just tot it all up and put a little bit of profit on there, and that's the fee.
Okay, I see. What would you say is like the largest project you've ever worked on?
I would say that was the job down in Leon-Solent, which was one of my first ever projects.
Where was this, sorry?
This was down in Leon-Solent, a place called Chirk Farm, which is near Portsmouth.
Okay.
It was an old RMC quarry site, and my role down there was to look after the engineering of all the fill, because it was a site. It was a mile and a half long, half a mile wide, big deep hole in the ground. And we had to, first of all, we had to put a layer of stone down because it was classed as contaminated, even though there was nothing there.
Why is it classed as contaminated?
Because it's being filled. The Environment Agency said we could have some contaminants in there, so they made us put this. It was a granular venting blanket in. Then we had to contain the site with this big plastic sheet. And then fill it up layer by layer. I mean, it was 300 mil layers of clay that was coming in from all over the south coast, just to fill this hole. And we had to make sure that every layer was compacted by the right amount. So we had all this earthworks plant sort of flying about here, there, and everywhere. We had a laboratory on site taking samples and making sure it was all compacted, and what the chemical analysis of it was, so that we got the right stuff that didn't affect the concrete. And that was the biggest job, and that took about 5 years, and I had about 4 or 5 guys working for me on that job. And eventually we got it all up to the right level, and then the house builders came in and started building their houses. Okay. And I was
proud.
I was, yeah. But it was a big job, and it was too big a job really for one. But I did have a good team around me, and Yeah.
Did you have any like curveballs thrown at you during that? I mean, for such a huge project, you wouldn't expect everything to run so smooth.
You wouldn't, and surprisingly, it did. It was.
Congrats!
It was a really good job. Actually, one of the geotechnical guys that I had working with us, he was one of the senior geotech guys on the Sydney Opera House, and so he came with a good background, and he came it just so happened that I'd worked with that crowd before, because when I was working on one of my assignments or one of my agency positions, that the company that he worked for was part of the group that I was working with.
Okay.
So it was. So
he's a good person to have on your team.
It was, yeah. But no, they were. It was a good crowd, and surprisingly, for such a big job, I mean, I suspect that once the houses started getting built, that's when things sort of got a little bit more complicated, because
you weren't there then.
I wasn't there then. No, I was out of it by then.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's quite good.
Yeah, that's great for you.
Mm.
So do you do most of your work just from your home office?
I do, yeah.
And is that how you'd like to keep it?
I do miss having an office, and I miss the interaction with people. I mean, it's great working from home, don't get me wrong, but there's always the temptation there to go and make another cup of tea and have another biscuit, and it's very easy to procrastinate and get sidetracked.
I think you can even do that in an office as well.
You can, but I remember when I had an office, and I used to be able to walk to work, and I loved that, because you get out of the house, you go to work, and work is work.
Yeah.
And then when you come home, home is home. So you leave your work behind, and you get the separation.
Definitely.
But I've been working from home for so long now that there's the separation, the distinction, the lines have got a little bit blurred.
Is it hard to wind down?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But it depends on the jobs that I get, because sometimes I'll get a job in and I'll get really stuck into it and I'll really enjoy doing it. And I can start at, say, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I can still be working at midnight. But because I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and that's the other thing. I enjoy what I do. So that's a big plus.
Yeah.
And it's almost like having a hobby and getting paid for it.
Yeah, that's great. So it's not tainting your home environment.
It's not, no, but I would like to. I think I'm my own worst enemy. I think I'd like to learn to say no a bit more, and just say, right, work finishes at 6 or 5 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I shut the door and walk away from it.
Do you have a dog or anything? Because I feel like that would help you, like have set times you need to be out of the house.
No, I've got 2 cats and they don't like walking.
Oh.
I would like a dog, and I've had dogs, but I've had dogs in the past, but I don't know, maybe.
You seem like a dog kind of person. I can imagine you having like a German Shepherd.
I grew up with dogs. I've had spaniels and terriers and retrievers and labs and all sorts. I love dogs, and yeah, I'd love to have another one. Maybe. Never say no.
Yeah,
it would get me out of the house. And the thing is, I live in a house that's in the middle of a field. And it's quite remote.
Whereabouts is this?
This is just outside Reigate, so near Gatwick.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I see all these people walking dogs, because they walk up the drive, and the drive's about half a mile long, and then it goes to a manor house, and then it goes off into the fields, and they walk up from the road, and you see all these people walking the dogs, and there's a little village down the road from me as well, and I know all of them, so they come up and walk their dogs, and I'm sitting there looking out the window thinking, I wish I could. I'd like to go out there.
You're in the prime location.
I am. Yeah, no dog, just me and a computer, and I've got the priorities wrong. Huh?
2 cats.
And 2 cats. Yeah.
You should walk. You should try walking the cats. You say they don't.
There's a pub I can walk to 20 minutes away from me, and I walk to I walk across the fields to it.
Yeah.
And the cat has followed me.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe he just likes going to the pub as well.
Maybe he does. Yeah. Maybe that's what he does when I'm not there.
Yeah. I think our one does that, to be honest. Okay, so let's get back to the interview. I wanted to ask how sort of these like sustainability initiatives that have come into play in the last like 20 years, how have they affected your role, do you think?
I think certainly, because a lot of the stuff that I do is related to surface water drainage, and that's affected me the most, because before it used to be we'd have a housing estate to design, and we'd design all the surface water drainage, and we'd design for a storm, and now and the storm would have a discharge point, and you could discharge freely into, say, a public sewer. Now, if you're taking a housing estate, you've got to work out what all the runoff is going to be, and then you've got to decide whether it's going to go into the ground, or you've got to decide whether it's going to go into a watercourse or into a sewer. And then, depending upon how you're going to dispose of it, You've then got to design for the climate change. So you've got a 1 in 100 year storm, which is quite an intense storm event. And then you've got to add another factor on top of that, which is normally about 40% for climate change. And that increases the rainfall that you've got to consider in the design. So you end up with potentially these huge underground storage tanks, which then release water at a controlled rate. I mean, I think that's what's affected me the most. It hasn't really affected the structures design too much.
Yeah.
But certainly when I'm looking at doing houses and sort of the smaller developments, and I'm doing the planning for it, they are looking for more sustainability. So you're looking at things like green roofs, blue roofs, green walls. I did an industrial unit over in Beddington, and that had a huge, great big green wall on it. So we put all these wires up, and then there was a green roof on top, and we had all the different planting on top of the roof.
Oh, lovely.
So it's I like it, but it's got its place, and it doesn't always fit well, or it doesn't sit well on housing developments. Yes, it should be sustainable with housing developments, but you're limited on how much you can achieve, and we're looking to try to get to carbon neutral, and it is quite difficult. It's quite difficult to achieve, and the building regulations have changed certainly over the last 12 months, 13 months with Part L, which is the insulation requirements and heat losses and heat gains. And that has bumped up things. So it makes houses more thermally efficient.
Does it make your job more lengthy?
No, it's not really, no, because if you look at, let's say we're looking at Part L on a house, all it's doing is it's increased the cavity width, so you've got more insulation to put in the cavity. It's made the floor zones a little bit thicker because you've got to put more insulation in the floors.
Yeah.
So it hasn't really made it longer. It's made the hoops that you've got to. It's increased the number of hoops that you've got to jump through in order to demonstrate compliance with the new regulations. But as far as the overall design goes, we know that we've got a 150 mil cavity. We'll put 100 mil of insulation in it or whatever, and we know that if we've got solar blocks on the inside and the outside, we know it's going to meet the required U value, or the thermal transmission rate.
Okay. And with this kind of new, I don't know if you call that technology, how do you stay updated on this kind of thing if you're not constantly going back to sort of study? Is this just trends, industry trends?
There are industry trends, but as part of the organisations that I belong to, we're required to undertake a certain number of CPD hours, which is continuing professional development.
Yeah, okay.
So you've got to take time out. For the Chartered Association of Building Engineers, which I'm a member of, I've got to do, I think it's 35 hours a year of study, just to keep on top of everything. And I'm also a member of the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors, so that's another thing. And the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, so there's another thing. So I've got a huge amount of
hobbies.
I've got to keep on top of things. But fortunately, it's because with the different jobs you get, you do get snippets of something, and then of say a bit of new technology, and it sends you down this avenue where you can actually go and learn a bit about it, and then all of a sudden you've sat down and you've read about it for 2 hours, and you've gained a little bit of knowledge, and that's a tick box on the CPD. So
it's not like an irritating thing that you've got to do.
It's not, no. And I think it's a good thing, because you've got to keep on top of things, because otherwise I'd still be designing to things that I learnt when I was at college, and things have moved on since then.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a book in 2001 on engineering, and I've recently been asked to renew it. And I looked at what I've read, and there's so much in there is out of date, just because legislation's changed, regulations have changed, things have moved on.
Wow, that's cool that you wrote a book. What's it called?
External Works, Roads and Drainage by Phil Pitman.
There we go. Everyone purchase it in the link down below. How can you buy this book?
It's been, I think it's out of print now, but you can get it on Amazon, but you end up paying silly prices for it. I mean, when I wrote it, it's 23 years ago now that I started it, and I think it was eventually published in 2002, and you could pick it up for about, I think it was $14.99 then, but depending where you go, I've looked on websites, and some prices they're asking £200.
Wow!
I don't see any of it.
Really?
No. It went out of print, and when it went out of print, my royalties stopped. But I didn't do it to make money. I did it as I thought I'd like to do this. Somebody suggested it, and I thought,
yeah, it's a
I'll give it a go. Yeah.
How much is it for a signed copy?
Oh, free.
Well, do you think you'll be making a new book anytime soon? Like, would you go back and at any point?
I have been asked, and it's something that I'm looking at the moment. But it's trying to. When I did it, I had a lot of free time on my hands, and I had a bit of a different work-life balance. Now I've got a lot of work, and I'd need to take sort of a day out a week, or certainly a good few hours out of my week to actually sit down and do it. But it's something I'd like to do.
Yeah, it's a very cool achievement because it's sort of like physical, it's like something that you can keep forever. What do you think the construction, planning, design industry landscape is going to look like in the next sort of 5 or 10 years? Have you got any predictions?
That's an interesting one. To be honest, I haven't really looked that far ahead. But I'm so busy in working in the now that I tend to look at the technology that's coming out and that's in the magazines, and rather than looking at what's going ahead. But there's certainly a big transition over to sort of a greener construction, carbon neutral construction, and I do think that's a great thing. But it does add a huge amount of costs. And I think the regulations that are in force are only going to get stricter because we've got climate change targets to meet. Whether we'll meet them or not, I don't know, and I don't know whether the construction industry is going to help.
Do you think that the restrictions that are in place and the regulations are fair, in your opinion? Do you agree with them?
Absolutely, yeah. I think they're there, and they set a standard of building and design. I mean, it's not just in house building and industrial units and things like that, but it's also in roads and infrastructure. So the standards are there, so that you've actually got a standard to build to. And I think it's the right thing, and I think it's come a long way. And I think historically we've got away with a lot of things that we shouldn't have done. The construction industry has been pretty poor. It's had a pretty poor reputation. And I think it's heading in the right direction.
What kind of instances where I don't really know where construction has just been kind of ignorant to carbon emissions and sustainability in the past?
I think there's been a general reluctance to embrace change.
Yeah.
We've always done it this way, so therefore we're going to carry on doing it this way. And there comes a point where the younger generation are taking it forward, and it does take time, and I think it needs the younger people to come in and say, look, come on, we need to do this. All right, you've always done it that way, but we don't think that's the right way of doing it now. We need to move on. We need to be more sustainable. We need to not bring things in from Holland. We need to build them in the factory just down the road, and then bring it over this way. Or we do things like off-site manufacturing, where everything gets built in a factory in a controlled environment, where you're actually monitoring where things are coming from, and then you bring it to site, and then you put it all together, rather than having a load of concrete delivered, where that's you've got the huge carbon footprint from the concrete production. Then you've got to bring it into site, and you might have 15, 20 deliveries. And it adds not just to the carbon footprint. Well, it adds to the traffic, the congestion.
Yeah.
And we've got to do construction transport plans. So we've got to schedule all the deliveries for certain times, and sometimes it makes things difficult. But going back to what you said originally, historically, there's been no health and safety. There's not been any real nod to environment or sustainability. It's just, we're going to build this, we're going to get it done, and whatever the cost.
And what is the sort of predicted lifespan of a building from a civil engineer's point of view? Has that changed in itself? Has that expectation changed? We want this structure to be around. Okay, we don't want it to just be around for 100 years. We want this to be around for 200 years. Has that gone up?
No, it hasn't, surprisingly. Houses we tend to design to say we reckon that they're going to have a 100-year lifespan.
Yeah.
and it's the same with most buildings. They all have a sort of that sort of target, and then you take roads. Roads might have a 40-year or a 60-year lifespan, depending upon what the usage is. That hasn't really changed.
Is it because it's not possible with the materials that are available?
It's definitely achievable, and I think the way things are constructed now makes it. But it's not designed to last longer than 100 years, but it does by default. But the houses that are building now, who knows? They might be here in 100 years.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah. Yeah, if they haven't been flooded away.
Yeah. Would you say it's like a lot more challenging working in an area that's more low-lying? I know you were talking about like the runoff and like, is that, does that add a lot more work for you if you're working somewhere that is... It
does in some respects. You get you get different flood zones. So you get flood zone 1 where you can build pretty much anything. Then you get flood zone 2, which is which you've got to be a little bit more careful about. And then you get what's known as flood zone 3, which is 3A and 3B. And the 3B is the functional floodplain. So when a river floods, the water will go somewhere. And generally speaking, you can't build in there. Or if you do, what you've got to do is you've then got to provide what's known as compensatory storage. So if you build a house with a footprint of say 10 metres by 10 metres, and the flood depth is and it's in the floodplain, and the flood depth is say half a metre, so you've then got 10 by 10, which is 100 times by 0.5. So it's 50 cubic metres, and you've got to provide that 50 cubic metres of storage that you've lost somewhere else. Okay. So because that 50 cubic metres that you've lost is going to be is going to be volume of water that's going to be displaced.
Right.
So you've got to put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's what's meant by compensatory storage.
Right.
And it tends to be why people don't build in the functional floodplain.
Okay.
But yes, it is certainly something that creates a little bit of extra work. Only because you've got to look at where the flow goes, you've got to look at overland flows, you've got to look at flow routing, how it affects properties downstream, how the whole catchment works as a whole thing. So you've got flow, you've got properties and fields and whatever upstream, and that contributes to the catchment. And you've got to look at how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B, how long the storm's likely to be, and you then end up with a whole load of complicated arithmetical gymnastics, which thankfully is all done now by software. We don't have to do it by hand anymore.
That's good.
And it predicts what the runoff model is going to be, and you can work out what sort of volume of storage and where it needs to be, and what sort of form it needs to take.
I mean, you were saying that when you were in school, you really wanted to move away from the sciences and stuff. This sounds pretty scientific to me.
Yeah, but when I was at school and when I was younger, I didn't really understand what I was learning it for.
Yeah.
And now I'm actually applying. It's a practical application, which I get. Whereas sitting in a classroom and just learning maths and algebra, I think I'm never going to use this. But actually,
it's not memorable.
It's not. No, it didn't have any practical application.
Yeah.
But now it does.
Yeah. Great. So, do you have children?
I do.
And are they doing anything related to civil engineering?
Absolutely nothing.
No.
Okay.
Why is that? You scare them off?
I don't think they didn't really have any interest in it.
Okay.
My eldest, he works in a lab. He's a lab technician. My middle one, she does archery, and that's her hobby, and she does a lot of that. She gets paid for it.
That's such a cool hobby.
It is.
I literally hadn't heard of that as a hobby before. Yeah. Where does she do that?
She does it all over the world. I can't claim any credit other than she's my daughter.
Okay.
It's her stepdad's got her into it, and he's done fantastic things. And I can't say anything against him.
Wow, cool.
But no, she's done well with that. And my youngest, he's at uni doing business studies. So none of my kids have got into construction or shown any interest in it, apart from when I've said, "Oh, can you help me and I'll pay you?" And that's the only time.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Usual sort of story.
Yeah. So, other than work, I mean, what interests do you have in life? Musical interest. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. I do like music. Rock's my bag, my jam.
Okay,
I've always been into rock. I used to play the drums in loads of different bands. I haven't played for a long time, Jiu-jitsu is another thing that I enjoy doing, but I had a few injuries last year, so I had to stop for a little while. Hopefully going to get back into it in around about sort of February, March sometime.
Okay. So
yeah.
have you got a pretty good work-life balance? I mean, you say that you can't, it's the lines are blurred at home, but...
They are, but yeah, I have, yeah. I work to suit myself, and I do set myself some silly deadlines sometimes, but it's sometimes I'll get to a point where I think, well, no, I've had enough and I'm going to take a few days off. But no, generally the work-life balance is okay. I can work as much or as little as I want. I pick and choose.
Yeah.
But no, when I start getting into sort of outside activities, it'll be an even better balance.
In the summer.
In the summer, yeah. So I can go out and do cycling, and because this last year has been a particularly busy one for me. So and the other thing about working from home is that it's a very sedentary lifestyle. And it's only when I go out on site that I actually sort of get out and go and get a few steps in. And I've got to physically sort of get off my chair and go and do things. And I'm looking forward back to...
How often is that you go to site?
Maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
Oh, that's not too bad.
It's not too bad. No, it depends. It depends on the needs of the jobs, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there'll be periods when I'm just sitting at home working and just head down and doing design, doing CAD work, doing calculations, and doing that sort of stuff. And then that'll all be finished, and I'll need to go to site and do some measurements or see how things are being built or see what needs to be done. And so it's I'd say 2 or 3 times a week. I'll go out on average.
And just finally, I wanted to ask, what tips would you give to young professionals or university graduates, or even before that, secondary school students who are looking to go into civil engineering or structural engineering, or something related to that? If you could give maybe a few pieces of advice.
I think it's a great industry to join, and I don't think it's something that should be. It shouldn't be seen as historically it's been seen as a blokey environment, and I think it should be. It's open to everyone, and I've worked with some great women engineers and some great. Just some great engineers, and it's a science technical subject. Just what would I say? What tips would I give?
What would you say to your younger self? That's a good question.
That's a good one. Don't do it. No, I'd say I wish I'd I'd carried on and with the surveying and then gone to uni rather than done the H&C H&D. H&C H&D was a great route because you've got you're doing you're learning at uni and then you're applying it during the week. And I think the vocational qualifications have got a huge amount going for them. I think I could have done better if I'd been a little bit more.
Even better if.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Phil. It's been a great chat. And I feel like I know a lot more about civil engineering now and structural engineering, because I didn't really know anything before. So, and I hope all of our listeners enjoyed this episode. If you've got any feedback, you can leave that in the comment section on YouTube. And we will see you next time on The London Architect.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.